Hello, I'm Diane Trees, Director of the UCF Metro Center. With the push for online education, STEM degrees, soaring tuition costs, and budget cuts among the issues facing higher education, it's no wonder that reform and change may be key elements of this year's legislative session. Stay tuned as the UCF Metro Center, in partnership with the Orlando Sentinel, brings you Florida Forward, conversations about the future. Today's topic is Shake-up in Higher Education.
This episode of Metro Center Presents is brought to you in part by the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies and the Orlando Sentinel.
At this time, I would like to bring forward our UCF Provost and Executive Vice President, Dr. Tony Waldrop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane, and welcome all of you to Florida Forward. Speaker Weatherford and our Florida legislatures are working diligently to enhance our economy and to create more high-tech jobs in Florida. The state university system and the Florida college system are glad to be the engines that power that success. UCF and the other 11 state universities, as well as the 28 state colleges and community colleges, are leaders in creating high-wage jobs and training our state's future workforce. Universities also conduct groundbreaking research that fuels the Sunshine State's growing innovation economy. More than ever, Florida's higher education is a key ingredient for the economic prosperity of our state. For example, last year our universities generated an overall economic impact of nearly $80 billion, as well as our researchers have collectively earned at least $1.6 billion in grants each of the past 3 years. Our state universities are the #1 producer of patents in Florida, with more than 700 granted last year, and many of these are launching pads for new high-tech industries, as well as expansions that invigorate our Florida economy. UCF, Seminole State College, and many other of the colleges and universities represented here are proud to be among the key higher education partners in the Florida High-Tech Corridor Council. This is a place where the best and brightest university and college talent work with industry professionals to create new products, jobs, and opportunities. When it comes to producing graduates in STEM areas, that is science, technology, engineering, and math, Florida's universities are leading the way. This state ranks 3rd in the nation with more than 10,000 undergraduate degrees awarded in these fields of study each year. Thank you. But even more important, we want to do far more and to aim higher. And as with any industry that generates such a substantial return, there is justification for investment. We do know that our legislators have been in a tough position over the last several years. They have to balance investments against multi-billion-dollar gaps in revenue. As a result of that, state funding for university higher education alone has been cut by 25%. And this year, for the first time, the student's share of the cost of their education has reached 50%. Universities and colleges have responded to these cuts. We've done it by becoming more efficient. At UCF, we have grown to serve the most students of any Florida university, and today we award 12% of all baccalaureate degrees produced by public and private institutions in Florida. However, at the same time, UCF operates with the state's lowest administrative cost in funding per full-time student, and our instructional costs are among the lowest in the state. While our universities and colleges remain among the most affordable in the country, continuing on our path of tuition increases may keep some deserving students away. Without more investment, we will have to limit enrollment, and our ability to continue producing the kind of talent that Florida businesses and industries demand will suffer. We do recognize that with additional investment comes additional accountability, and we welcome it in higher education. Increased support should be tied to specific goals, such as higher graduation rates. This, we hope, would ensure a maximum return on any investment. With the collaboration of all of you here today, we will not only aim higher, but we will produce greater returns than ever for our students, our communities, and our states. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret that you're a champion for online learning. Rest assured that we support your efforts and look forward to helping you achieve your goals. UCF, for example, is already recognized as a state leader and a national model for web-based education. More than 1/3 of our student credit hours are produced through online classes. That's equivalent to more than 20,000 students. To all of you, thank you for being here, and I'm sure we're going to enjoy this great forum.
Well, I'd like to invite our panelists to take the stage now. And as they make their way over here, a couple of quick programming notes. Each of the panelists will have a couple of minutes, and I hope it'll be just a couple of minutes, for some opening remarks as I introduce each of them. After that, we will dive into a discussion about the issues that I know you all came here to hear talked about. And my colleague Diane Trees, as she mentioned, will be taking questions off the 3x5 cards on your tables. I hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity to participate in this forum in that way by writing down your questions and making sure one of the students out here is able to come pick it up. Well, Will Weatherford is Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives and will preside over the House during the 2013 and 2014 legislative sessions. Mr. Weatherford resides in Wesley Chapel and was first elected to the House in 2006. I always like to offer an interesting fact or two about our speakers, but with Speaker Weatherford, I came up with 4. At age 33, he's currently the youngest House Speaker in the United States. Just wait. His little brother is former FSU quarterback Drew Weatherford. He is the son-in-law of former House Speaker Alan Bentz, and he shares a birthday with my wife.
Hey.
Speaker Weatherford, a couple of minutes for opening remarks.
Thank you very much. And when you guys heard that about my age, you're probably all scared now, so thank you, Mike, for doing that. No, I'm really honored to be here, and I'm just going to be a couple of minutes. First of all, thank you so much for allowing me to come here and partake in a conversation that I am really excited about. And let me just say really quickly, we are doing some great things in our higher education system. We have what I believe are the building blocks of a wonderful higher education system. But I think we have to recognize that there is a tsunami that is coming our way to the way that people learn and the way that people want to learn. And we've got to make sure that we're leveraging technology to be ahead of the curve. I use this example, but I'll just be really brief in it. But years and years ago, the way that we always got our news was we had the newspaper, and that was how we knew what was happening. But we also knew what was happening yesterday and not necessarily today. What technology has done is not just change the way of how we get information, but when we get it. And now I can go on the website of the OrlandoSentinel.com and get exactly what's happening today in real time. And people are preferring to get their information that way. And it's happening in education. And so this idea of embracing and leveraging technology to bring education to more people in a high quality format is something we should do. And the Board of Governors has a mission to produce 90,000 degrees by 2025. And I'm here to tell you, we can't build enough universities to support that. We can't build enough classrooms. We can't build enough football stadiums. We don't have the resources to build out that type of infrastructure. But technology allows us to embrace those things and to produce those types of degrees in a format and in a way that we never thought was possible. And so my hope today is to focus our conversation around the embracing of online learning and the understanding that, if we can get more people access to high quality education, that's what breaks the challenges of inequality in our system. That's what allows people to have real equal opportunity as they go forward and try to have a future. And we all believe, everyone's here, the reason this room is full is because you care about education and you recognize that it is the gateway to having a successful and productive life. And we have something in the palm of our hands that is called technology that allows it to make it accessible to everyone. So my question is, why would we not take advantage of that? And I'm hoping Florida can lead the charge in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ann McGee has served as president of Seminole State College since 1996 and will celebrate her 17th anniversary as president on Friday. She began her career as a speech and English faculty member at our southernmost campus of the state's college system, Florida Keys Community College. Since arriving at Seminole back when it was Seminole Community College, the number of campuses has risen from 1 to 4, and enrollment is now more than 32,000 students. Didn't mean to get ahead of things, making it the fastest growing college in the one of the fastest growing colleges in the nation. Interesting fact about Dr. McGee is she is only the second president in Seminole State's 48-year history. And I should also mention that she is yesterday informed that she is receiving the Metro Orlando EDC's James B. Green Award for Economic Development. So congratulations. And some remarks?
Thank you, Mike. Looking out over the audience and talking to many of you before the panel, this is a community that cares about education. You all have always wrapped your arms around the colleges, both the community colleges, now the Florida College System, and UCF, and said, how can we do it bigger and better for the students in our community? So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion today talking about what we are already doing in terms of online or distance learning. But also it's a great time, and I look at myself as really representing not just Seminole, but really having multiple hats for all 28 of the Florida College System colleges, formerly community colleges, and the million students that we enroll as a system. We are one of the largest systems in the United States. 80% of the minorities that are enrolled in higher education will be starting their careers at what was a community college, now the Florida College System. And now we're doing our education all the way up through bachelor's degrees because Florida can't build all the universities they need to build, and we need to rise in the ranks of the numbers of our residents that do have bachelor's degrees, preparing them for both the jobs that are here now and for the jobs of the future. So I'm looking forward to the discussion about how dynamic education is in Florida, because I think we've got the model. Direct Connect with UCF is a national model for how students can get through college quickly, efficiently, and get a great education. So, Speaker, I would say to you, Florida is well on its way, but we're looking to you to help us get even further.
Thank you. Tom Oxter is a professor of philosophy at the University of Florida, where he's taught since 1973. His areas of specialization include philosophy and ethics, and his articles on those subjects have been published more than 24 times. He's also served in editorial capacity with several academic journals. Dr. Oxter is president of United Faculty of Florida, which represents 23,000 faculty and graduate assistants at Florida's state universities and colleges. Interesting fact, for 7 years he volunteered to teach a Saturday morning philosophy class at Florida's jails and prisons. Dr. Oxter?
Thank you very much. There's a lot of good news about Florida's universities and colleges, and I want to just share some of that with you to start so we know what we have already before we talk about the development of that. The Southern Regional Education Board president is Dave Spence, and he came to a meeting of stakeholders in Florida in 2009, and he said, there's a lot of talk about reform around, but let me make it clear. Florida has the model system for the nation in articulation between community colleges and universities. And we hold you up as the example for the entire country of what it's like to have the most flawless articulation system moving people from one system to the next. In addition, this past year, you may know, or you may have heard, that the Chamber of Commerce ranked Florida universities as first in the nation for cost effectiveness, and ranked us first in the nation for efficiency in getting through the articulation system, and praised us for, in fact, saying, you managed to award a bachelor's degree for $46,000. You might be interested to know that the median for costs of bachelor's degrees is $68,000, more than $20,000 more than we charge. You might also be interested to know that Florida is first in being under $50,000. There's only one other state that even gives a bachelor's degree for under $50,000, and there are only 5 other states that give a bachelor's degree for under $55,000. We are doing very well. We are the most cost-effective system in the country, and we have the best articulation system. So when we talk about reforming higher education, let's remember what we have already and build on that.
Thank you. Tico Perez is an attorney with the law firm Perez, Bruce, and Jonason, which recently merged with the Gunster law firm just this week, I think. He's also co-founder of Edge Public Affairs, a government relations consulting firm. Mr. Perez has a lengthy resume of civic involvement, most recently completing 7 years of service on the Florida Board of Governors, where he was chairman of the Budget Committee. Mr. Perez is widely known in Florida, Central Florida, as a political analyst and the host of the radio show Talkin' with Tico on WDBO 580. Interesting fact, Mr. Perez is an Eagle Scout who has gone on to win some of Scouting's most distinguished adult honors. Mr. Perez?
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Mr. Speaker, for taking the time to come to this forum. Everyone knows your passion for education, and it is going to be an extraordinary legislative session. As Mike pointed out, I had the privilege of serving on the Florida Board of Governors for the last 7 years, and 2 years before that had the honor of serving on the Board of Trustees at my alma mater, the University of Central Florida. I will tell you, Dr. Oxter is correct. Excuse me. There are many extraordinary things happening in higher ed in this state, and there are some extraordinary challenges that I know we're going to talk about. Some of them are policy-driven, many of them are finance-driven. My focus is generally finance. As the budget chair for the last 5 years, I've gotten to see the effects of state budget cuts, tuition increases, enrollment caps on our system. And in case I don't get to them during our presentations, in the middle of many of your tables, there is one set of handouts with a set of slides with just some very interesting metrics on the state of Florida, where we are in annual tuition costs, 45th in the country, where we rank, what it costs you to really attend the university system, things of that nature. And I put those out there hopefully to refer to them in our conversation today, but if not, to let you know that all of that data, many very good PowerPoint presentations, research papers, articles, the summary that was done by our consultants on our virtual university issues are all online at flbog.edu. You can go online, you can download that data. If you're really interested in the issues that we're going to be talking about today, at least on the higher ed component, the state university system, it is all there, it is all public, it is all online. But I do have to agree with all of my colleagues. The future is extraordinary. Virtual education is key to moving forward. There are a lot of public and private alternatives there. The state is blessed with an articulation system which is the envy of the country, and we've got some policy conversations that we need to have. So I'll stop introducing myself and let us get into those conversations. Mike?
All right, thanks very much. Just one thing, panelists, if you'd be sure not to speak too closely to the microphone. There's a sweet spot a little bit back from it, so that's where you want to be. Speaker Weatherford, let's start with you because, frankly, a lot of people are here to hear what you have to say about higher education because as Speaker of the House, you'll have considerable influence over that. You've said for months that one of your top priorities is higher education. I was wondering if you can elaborate on what it is that you find needs the most attention. You talked about the promise of online education and technology, but could you talk about issues like academic rigor, high-level research, money for universities, preparing students for workforce? What are the other issues besides technology that you feel the legislature needs to give attention to, and what form would that attention take?
Yeah, well, and that's
It's a big question.
There's a couple of questions embedded in that.
Sure.
I'll do my best to answer all of them. Let me first say that I think the stars are aligned to have a very good adult, what I call an adult conversation about higher education in Florida for this year. The governor seems to want to talk a lot about it. We have a great Senate President, Don Gates, who wants to talk a lot about it. I'm interested. There's a lot of members who are in this room, my colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats, who are very interested in having a conversation about it. And so we're going to have a very thoughtful debate. You know, to get off of the online component, but focusing on the bigger system, I agree with everything that was said. I think we are the model for the country when it comes to articulation. We are the model for the country when it comes to affordability. But the challenge is that there is a resource shortage at our universities, and frankly, I think the legislature and state government has a lot for the blame when it comes to that. And the reason is because the state of Florida and the United States of America just went through one of the worst recessions it's ever had. And so TECO has a piece of paper that's out there that's floating around, and it will tell you that as tuition was going up, the state's investment was going down. That's not necessarily a positive thing, but I think the bigger challenge we have is the differentiation between our research institutions and our non-research institutions. We have some universities in Florida that have a charge to do research, and we have some universities in Florida who have a charge to produce degrees, and they're different missions. And I think somehow we've forgotten that because we treat them all the same. If you were to look at our university system, the fact that it costs about the same to go to the University of North Florida or the University of West Florida as it does to go to the University of Florida, most people would say, why? You know, we have created this system where we want everyone to be treated the same from a tuition perspective, from a state investment perspective, and what that's done is given us a lot of good universities, but not the great ones. And so my question to the panel and everyone here would be, if we're doing so great, why don't we have a single university in the top 10 when it comes to national rankings? Why don't we have 2 or 3 universities in the top 25 when it comes to nationally recognized? And these are things that are all achievable, but they come with money, they come with discipline, and they come with us making the tough choices and recognizing that we can't do everything for everybody. And I believe if there's one thing we can do, it's working with our Board of Governors to create that discipline so that we have to be able to say no. We have to recognize that there have to be specialties. And we also have to understand that the state's going to have to put more money into higher education. But let me tell you something else. It shouldn't be as affordable to go to a state research-based institution as it is to go to a non-research-based institution. And that's a conversation that the city, that the state legislature and the governor and our citizens have not been willing to have, and I think we have to have that now.
Okay, well, that's odd. Panel, Speaker Weatherford posed a question about why we don't have any top-ranked universities. Anybody want to take that on?
Before I know my colleagues to the right will take that on, let me just say we do have the #1 community college in the nation, and Valencia College,
Yes, we do.
so we do. So I'll yield to you, Tico.
Well, I am certainly happy to chime in, and I think the speaker answered part of his own question by pointing out that a great deal of this is a money issue when it comes to hiring and retaining the best faculty in America. One of the challenges and one of the arguments that we had with Governor Christ ages ago was the salary that we pay faculty, or the salary that faculty bring and get themselves paid through their research grants and through the programs and the money that they bring to the state, is an essential part of their role in the state university system and becoming a top 10 university or in the AAU. The challenge is, as we have been inconsistent in state funding of our universities, not showing our faculty raises on a regular basis, cutting salaries, cutting programs, it makes it very difficult to recruit the best faculty in America to come to the state of Florida. They don't believe that we are committed to higher ed, so they're not going to come. Now, Speaker Weatherford has always been supportive of higher ed, Senator Gates always supportive of higher ed, and certainly Governor Scott is there, so hopefully there's a new day. But I will tell you that in the past, and watching particularly during the Charlie Crist term, it was very difficult to engage any meaningful faculty member across the country to pick up their research base, pick up their graduate assistants, and come to Florida not knowing what next year held or the year after that held. And that has been a huge barrier to universities like University of Florida, Florida State, and UCF reaching that top 25 and top 10 category.
I would
Dr.
agree with
Oxter, that sounds like a good place for you to weigh in.
I would agree with that, and I think the problem is much worse than people realize. Eric Barron testified before the Governor's Blue Ribbon Task Force. He pointed out that he lost 50 faculty members this past year. They were all research faculty, very well known. They were hired away by other universities that can pay a lot more than Florida can pay in salaries. And that, in addition, he lost 50 the year before that. And what happens to us most often is that we get people to the point, we hire them in at competitive salaries nationally. So the hiring salary is fine. After that, there are no salary increases. There's no money for salary increases in Florida at all. So by the time somebody is here for 5 years, they realize that their career is probably going nowhere in terms of salaries and funding that they get. So then what that means, and Eric Barron used this phrase, we are actually using Florida universities as a farm team for the other powerful research universities. They hire people away from us at salaries of $20,000 more than we are paying. And as soon as they get tenure, as soon as they're here for 5 or 6 years, they are gone because other people see the value of these faculty members. And in addition, I want to point out that because there are no salary increases once people get here, faculty who have been here for 10 years are typically $10,000 behind other faculty members who are their counterparts, people who got a PhD from the same institution, people who went to the same caliber of university somewhere else to teach and do their research. And the result is for every 10 years you're here, you're $10,000 behind where your counterparts are at other universities. So people who stay here for a lifetime are in real trouble with what their salaries are like. They're $20,000 or $30,000 behind. So the result is that our lack of attention to what it takes to retain faculty and to attract them here and to believe that they're going to be with other faculty who will stay and be part of a team, because faculty work in teams. They don't just work individually by themselves. They work on projects together, they inspire each other, they run programs together. And if you're not funding it, you're not funding the faculty, you're not funding a first-rate university.
Well, Dr. Oxter, I wanted to follow up with you on the issue of faculty. There's been some talk of changing the way that faculty are evaluated using some metrics and even student evaluations as a means of testing how well they're doing. Could you talk about that for a moment? And do you think that that would have a further effect on the ability of the state to recruit and retain faculty?
Well, I think if we adopted the Texas plan, we'd be in real trouble with metrics, and that was the governor's initial suggestion. And so I'm glad that the uproar across the state over using Texas as a model for Florida was so substantial that the governor backed off of that idea, and he no longer mentions the Texas plan as a model for Florida. But the Texas plan suggested that we evaluate faculty teaching by students by simply giving them customer satisfaction surveys. And so you treat faculty as if they're selling some kind of commodity. How satisfied are you later afterwards with it? So it's not even a faculty evaluation. It has nothing to do with the kind of questions we ask. And it's very clear from looking at what Texas did that that's not what they're doing. So I think if you want to know the quality of a faculty member's teaching, you need to use a multi-sided approach to answering that question. And one thing is, of course, student scores, but that doesn't tell you anything about how difficult the subject matter is, how intense the course was for students, what kind of retention of content they get as a result of that, whether content that was delivered by a faculty member, although it might have been interesting to students, and maybe the faculty member was an interesting faculty member to be in a classroom with, unless you have a peer of that faculty member who sits in the classroom and also makes comments and judges that faculty member and gives some feedback about what it's like to actually teach that subject and how much of what is taught in the classroom by that person is actually what needs to be delivered to students in a classroom. So you need many ways of looking at it. You need to have department chairs interacting with people. You need to have other faculty members sitting in on classes. We have a system at the University of Florida that has several different factors, and you have to balance all of these together. You don't just take one thing and say, well, let's give students a customer satisfaction survey, and we'll give you a 25% bonus if you this year if you manage to do well on that. These are superficial ideas, and they go nowhere.
Well, Speaker Weatherford, could you comment briefly on that?
Well, I would agree that I think the Texas model was flawed, but I also believe that there are forms of measurement and accountability that we can have. And let me give you some examples. We make a $780 million investment in the University of Florida every single year. That's one university in Gainesville. It's a check we write for $780 million. That's a lot of money. What would be nice to know is, by program, if you get a degree in this area, what are the odds that you're going to get a job? What's your graduation rate? What's your placement rate? What's your default rate? And some of that data you can get, but a lot of it you can't. And so we spend $4 billion on higher education in the state of Florida. And I believe that every citizen, every student who's considering going to one of our great institutions, whether it's UCF or Florida or anywhere else, they ought to know that if they go major in this degree, the odds of them getting placed in a job in that degree is 10% or 80% or 50%. And so while I don't want to micromanage each classroom and have a survey that goes out to the students to determine whether or not the professor's any good, let's let the free market determine if it's any good. The free market will determine the value of that degree if they're willing to hire somebody who's got it. And if they get a degree, something related to what they actually studied. Now, I'm one of those, a lot of people in here got a degree in one thing and end up doing something else in life, and that's okay. But we should know when someone graduates from a state university, a state college, or anything else, whether or not they got a job within 6 months. And that type of data and the level of data that we can get from that, I'm being a little bit broad right now, but that type of information should be available, and it should be used to hold our universities and our state colleges accountable.
Well, Dr. McGee, it just so happens we were talking about that earlier on the community or state college level. Can you talk about what you all do, and does it sound like the kind of thing that would translate well to state universities?
Well, Florida is a data-rich state, at least where the Florida college system is concerned, because a lot of other states do not have the kind of placement data we have, student completion data. Just recently, the division of the Florida college system launched a new website called smartcollegechoices.com. Okay, smartcollegechoices.com. For those of you who have children that are thinking about what careers they want to go into, you may want to go to that website, because it will give you all 28 of the Florida college system colleges. It will give you by program our graduates. It will give you their placement rates in the job market, and it will give you the average salary. So for instance, if I'm a student looking at going into the health field and I want to go to Seminole State, I'm going to see that the average nurse starts out at $52,000 a year when they come out of our nursing program. So that data is out there for the Florida college system, for the 28 of us. I don't know if it's available for the universities or not, and that may be something that we want to do for the university system as well. But we are data rich, and we do have that data out there. The other piece that I would invite you all to look at is how well students do when they graduate from a community college, from a Florida college system college, and go on to a university. Through Direct Connect, we have information on all of the partner colleges that we can look by program and see how well our students do in each of those programs. And when we know they do as well as or better than most of the native students. So we're very proud of that. So those are things that we do look at as we evaluate our faculty and evaluate what programs we want to continue.
Well, can anyone on the panel enlighten us? Tico Perez, do you know if that kind of data is available for state universities?
I don't believe that data is available to the degree that Dr. McGee talked about, but again, on the website that I talked about, flbog.edu, you'll find the accountability report that was just filed by the Board of Governors before the Senate Education Appropriations Committee. And that basically sets forth an entire report of all of our state university system, all of the universities' work plans, what our metrics were on students in, time to degree, hours taken, et cetera. And that report is a very positive message, including positive things like our undergraduate STEM degrees are up 27% in the last 2 years. We've got some phenomenal successes in the areas that is important for the state. And I would tell you, we could spend hours going through the accountability report, or I could tell you to go check it out online. There's also a PowerPoint online that summarizes that report, which is about 20 pages, and I'd commend that to you as well.
Speaker Weatherford, is the kind of data that Dr. McGee mentioned the kind of thing you'd like to see state universities offer?
No, well, yes, I think that's exactly what we want to see them offer. And I think the Board of Governors has been proactive. I mean, what Mr. Perez is talking about is relatively new. I mean, this Board of Governors has been extremely proactive, and they've got a great board chair, and they have actually been going after this. But there's some things that are happening in higher education we're not telling people about. And so let me give you one example that you've probably never heard, but it's true. If you go to FAMU today, there's a 12% chance you'll graduate in 4 years. 12%. How many students do you think know that are looking to go to FAMU? That's a real challenge. And so that's one example. It's an extreme example. And it's one that I know that their president is working very hard to fix, and most of their students take longer than 4 years to graduate, and I get that. But my point is that we do have a lot of data, but what are we doing with it? And are we really educating people, and are we really holding ourselves accountable? And in our funding formulas, are we using that data that we were talking about at the state college system, which I believe, by the way, there's two different conversations. I think our state college system is one of the best in the country. I think that's hard to even refute. But I believe we have a long way to go in our university system when it comes to measurement and accountability, and then how we utilize it. And we should be rewarding the universities that are performing better. I mean, incentives work. They work in business. They'll work in the university system too. And I think there's things we can do to give tuition authority away to universities that are doing better, that are showing proficiency in these areas. And I'm willing to do that. I think people are willing to pay more for a product if they know that product is going to be better and is going to be valued in the private sector. I really do. And so I do believe, to answer your question, it's a long way to answer it, that the data that Mrs. McGee is talking about should be applicable to the university system, and we should be using it as part of our funding formula.
Mike, if I may, I think where the speaker is going is into a performance funding model analysis of our university systems, and the Board of Governors has been on this path now for over a year at the encouragement, by the way, of Speaker Weatherford, where we've looked at Ohio and Tennessee and Pennsylvania and all of these different states. Each state has a unique performance-based funding model where universities are measured and looked at upon different sets of criteria that depend on the different needs of that particular state to create a funding model where extra money goes to those universities that perform within those parameters. The Board of Governors has introduced one for the state of Florida that includes measurements of percentage of bachelor's degrees employed or continuing with their education further, a very important measure. Cost per undergraduate degree, average wages of employed undergraduates, 6-year graduation rate, and on and on. The challenge is determining the appropriate model to apply to the state of Florida, and that conversation is happening as we speak at the Board of Governors level. So we are on that path, and it's a very important path. It's the path of the future. But I also want to make a point, particularly on time to degree. 6 years is the number that's really used to measure a time to degree factor. Universities such as FAMU, where many of those students have to have part-time jobs or continue to work, it's very difficult to get out of the state university system in 4 years if you have another job. So as we look at these metrics, the key is to understand each of the respective universities, understand the challenges that they face, and then tailor those metrics to that population, to that community, and to those goals. That's what the Board of Governors is in the process of doing under Speaker Weatherford's encouragement and guidance, and I think we're going to get a good result out of this over the next 12 months.
Dr. Oxford, do you?
I just leaned over to Speaker Weatherford and I said, UCF did a study a couple of years ago, Tony, where you talked about students nationwide, and only 17% are currently traditional, come out of high school, go right on to college, go for 4 years, get a degree, come out and get a job. That's nationwide. I mean, the model has changed. Students are working, they have families, they have to work to get financial aid, to go to school, they're stopping out, they're coming back. So I'm not surprised. I mean, I am surprised by the student that walks across the stage at Seminole and says to me, 26 years and 5 children is what it took her to get to that night. And I want to say how many husbands, but I didn't. But that's the reality. Their lives happen to them as they're trying to be students. But I want to go back to, I mean, I made a statement earlier on that Valencia is #1 in the nation, and we're really proud of that. But it's a resource issue. And I'm surprised that Valencia has been able to get that ranking based on resources, because right now the Florida college system, we are getting the same amount per student that we got 10 years ago. And if any of you run a household, you know your expenses are not what they were 10 years ago. And yet look at what's happened to our enrollment. We're counter-cyclical. When the economy is good, people work, they don't go to community colleges. When the economy is bad, they come to their local, quote, community colleges, or now the Florida college system, to get retrained. That's the time when the legislature who funds us doesn't have money and says, sorry, we know your enrollments are up, but we don't have any money. And then when the economy gets better, they say, well, your enrollments are down. We have more money, but your enrollments are down. So somehow we've got to look at the funding model for the Florida college system as well. What we're doing is we're pushing it off to the student. Florida was based, back when I was a student at St. Petersburg Junior College many years ago, and then FSU, it was 75% from the state, 25% was supposed to come from the student. We're now, many of us, 50-50, and some of us have gone over that tipping point, and more of that comes from the student. And we all know student loan debt and the national crisis behind student loan debt. So we've got to look at, even though we're a low tuition state, how are we financing education? And is it on the backs of the students who really can't afford to pay what we're asking them to pay?
I would love to add that the state university system would be thrilled to be receiving the same amount per FTE that we received 10 years ago.
We're not.
There is a chart. There is a chart on your tables. I referred to it earlier. It shows E&G funding per FTE students. You can take a look at it. In 07-08, the university system received $9,148 per FTE. In 12-13, we received $4,489 per FTE, almost $4,500 less per student in the state university system. And tuition had gone from $39.76 to $56.29, where last year the students are paying more than 50% of their cost of education in the state university system. But again, the real challenge is to put that in some perspective, because Florida is still number 45 in the nation in tuition costs and fees. It is still a bargain. It should be. It should cost money to attend the state university system. I'm with Speaker Weatherford. If you want the quality of a University of Florida or UCF, you absolutely should have to pay for it. You need to have skin in the game, and we need a funding system, and I think the speaker's on path to give us that funding system that lets us plan, know what's coming next, and move forward. The challenge in the past is we've had many surprises from the legislature, including a $300 million cut last year, which we've been told will come back in the budget this year, that was severely impacting the ability of the universities to be able to plan and move forward. But boy, Dr. McGee, if we could have the FTE that we had 10 years ago per student, everything would be right in the state university system.
It would be a perfect world, right?
I wanted to give Dr. Oxter a moment to take a couple of steps back. We were talking about basing funding on performance measurements, and I wondered if you wanted to comment on that. Is that a good idea?
Well, I think performance measurements are fine, but I think you need to have a larger conception of success than just what job do you get within 6 months after you graduate, in which where your major is the deciding factor in getting that job. You have to be careful about this, because if you do a different analysis and you don't look at just what job did you get as soon as you graduated, and the governors don't take anthropology, you won't get a job in anthropology. And the Senate President said, don't take psychology, you won't get a job in psychology. Well, first of all, those two things aren't correct. But even if they were correct, you have to say it's not about getting a job immediately after you graduate. It's about what it's like for you to be launched into life, and what kind of success do you have as a result of being an educated person that has an all things considered kind of education, that makes you aware of the world you live in at the same time as you are specialized and have some technical skills that you can sell when you graduate. And what we find is that liberal arts majors from UF have the highest midlife salaries of anybody that graduates from UF. And it's because they have an expansive, larger conception of the world. They know how to compare methodologies. They know how to compare interpretations. They want to see life whole. They want to have discussions in a class. They want to compare their ideas. They go out into the world. They're full of imagination. They're full of ideas. And they also have some technical skills to get by in the short run. And they may be taking several jobs for the first 5 to 10 years that are not the ideal jobs that you would get with that degree. But that's not important. What's important is how they keep moving along and the opportunities that they know they can handle because they had that education. If you have just a technical degree, what happens is the minute you graduate, yes, you will get a job faster than somebody else, but guess what? your technology is going to be dated. Every technology has a time and date stamp on it. And it's going to be only 3 years maybe, and it speeds up all the time. 3 years maybe before your education is outdated and somebody else's education can be they can be hired at a higher salary than you can be, and pretty soon maybe you're not even having a job unless you go back and get educated again. Do we want to keep re-educating people in technical degrees, or do we want to have people have certain technical skills? Yes, but in addition have an interpretation of the world, have the challenge of entering life and being ready to enter life, and then go out and find whatever job they gravitate into. They're going to make the most of it, and then they're going to shift to another job that they'll make the most of. And by midlife, you ask the question, how much is that person making? That's the real question if you're talking about an authentic bachelor's degree.
Well, let's pause one moment and let the audience ask a couple of questions. Diane, you have one.
Yes, thank you. This is a broader question, but I think that it approaches a lot of what you've been talking about. It's not for any one panelist, but quote, so are we trying to have an education system or a job training system?
Who wants to take that? Speaker Weatherford?
Sure. First of all, I thought the comments that were just made were poignant and accurate to a large extent, because I don't think, we can just see what someone's doing in 6 months and determine, whether or not that should be how we should fund that university, whether or not that person is successful. I do think it's a lot longer than that. I think it's more complicated than that. But I also think there's got to be a formula. We have to know. There's got to be some basis of measurement that right now we don't have. As far as, whether or not we need to have, we're supposed to be preparing people for jobs or for life, I think it's both. I really do, and I don't want to be oversimplistic here. I know there's a STEM craze that's going on in this world right now, and I'm part of it, and I think that STEM is certainly the leader when it comes to, if you want an innovative economy, you've got to be producing more people in those STEM fields. But I also believe our best critical thinkers are liberal arts majors. I also believe that some of our most creative people never go into STEM-related fields. They go into something completely different, and so to try to socially engineer people into a certain major, I don't think that's healthy either. And I think, I'm a free market person, and sometimes that may play to my favor and sometimes it may not. But in this case, I truly believe that we should allow people to go into the areas they're interested in. People will be successful in areas if they're passionate about it. Don't force someone to go into an area that they don't want to be in. And so I share that. But to go back to this formula and this idea of how do we fund these institutions, understand today there is one way we fund institutions in Florida. Guess what it is? Enrollment. You get paid based on how many students show up at the campus. That is a flawed system. And I think everybody in here could agree with that. And so we are not just here to produce people to give them jobs. We're here to prepare them for life as a university system. And I think that we can and we should be doing both.
You're talking about revenue streams. This question just follows right in line. Again, they're not signed, and I'm taking you right from the audience. Should private industry help support higher education with a tax?
A tax?
Private
Sudden crickets.
well,
Tico, how about, or
Look,
Dr. McGee, you're about to say something. Go
My
ahead.
answer will be really short, so don't ask me.
Well, look, I'm really happy to chime in on that, and the answer is they already do. I mean, the state of Florida, private industry, our taxpayers, their employers, they hire the folks that we bring out and put into the employment field. If you're asking, or if the questioner is asking, should there be a separate dedicated tax for higher education or for the state college system, I'll say absolutely not. We need to have an allocation of the resources that exist in a prioritized basis, in a logical basis, which again, under the performance criteria that we're talking about and the Speaker Weatherford is advancing, we move forward from there. The easy answer is always to say, well, let's just create another cash flow, another revenue source, and fund that. At the end of the day, it doesn't create the discipline or the decision-making that's needed. I think the system we have of funding higher education needs to be reviewed, it needs to be looked at. I, for one, would love it if the legislature would give one lump transfer to the Board of Governors, let the Board of Governors fund higher education the way we hoped it had been designed in the first place, and then we could establish criteria and discipline amongst the universities and achieve some of those goals. But no, I don't think a separate income line or a separate tax upon the businesses of the state of Florida is going to be a helpful solution to the problem.
Hold that thought about the funding. We'll get back to that for a second. But Dr. McGee?
I want to take a different tack on the whole tax issue. Many of you know Jim Wattenbarger, who was a professor at University of Florida, was the architect for Florida's community college system, so that education could be available within driving distance to 95% of Florida's population. Jim said one of the mistakes he made when he put the Florida system together was there was no local tax base for community colleges. I know I've seen in other states, and I'll use Ohio, and I'll use Cuyahoga and Cleveland as one of the examples. They have a local tax base in addition to the dollars they get from the state. And it goes out every third year to their voters to vote support, local support for their local community college. Now, to me, it does two things. One, it gives you another revenue source. And with our aging facilities, Will, that's one of the very real issues that we have, is trying to keep our buildings and our technology up to where it should be for students. But if you had a local tax base, look at the accountability. If everybody at the community college, now the Florida college system, knew you had to go out to your local electorate every third year, and in Cuyahoga's case, it's a third of their budget. Is that not a great way to keep everybody accountable, offering the programs that businesses really need for their population, making sure that you're getting those graduates out there that are filling jobs? To me, that's a great way to have local accountability. Some of my colleagues may not like that because we like our funding coming from the state, but the reality is the state's not going to be able to fund everything we need to do. They don't now. So we've got to look at new revenue sources, particularly where our facilities are concerned and the kinds of programs we want to put in. And it's not a tax on local businesses right now, but we get a lot of contributions from local businesses to start up programs like our construction management program, because they know the community needs it and they know the money's not coming from the state to start it.
Okay, well, let's move. Dr. Oxter, do you want to add something?
Well, I don't favor any particular tax scheme, but I do want to point out that we're not paying anything in taxes compared with other states that are succeeding in higher education, and we're stringing together faculty, and we're stringing together programs with much, much less than we should be having. And for years, we have been at the bottom on per capita funding of higher education, so there has to be some tax raised in order to deal with that issue.
The lone voice.
Anyone else?
But I just want to point out that last week, this is January 25th issue of the Chronicle of Higher Education. They have all the latest data about how much different states are spending on higher education and how much they've cut higher education as a result of the recession. And very interesting to take a look at this, because Florida there are only 5 states that are worse than Florida, and how much they have cut higher education over the last 5 years. Only 5 states, and they're all states like Alabama and Arizona, and states that have problems economically, worse than Florida's problems. So there are only 5 states that are worse, but over 5 years. But that's in how much has been subtracted from their budget. So the past year, for example, 8% has been subtracted from Florida's higher education budget. And that doesn't count the $300 million that was taken raiding the reserve funds of the universities, $300 million, so legislators could balance the budget and not come up with any other money and take it from the universities. Now, what are those reserve funds used for? Well, we can't fund repairs of the university anymore, because the PICO money, which is the source of those repairs for infrastructure and upgrading buildings, that money is shrinking down to almost nothing compared with what it used to be. So the result is it is literally dangerous for our majors to be walking in, science majors to be walking into some of the buildings with laboratories and with complicated equipment, because the infrastructure is so outdated and there's no money to take care of it. And the reserve funds were what universities were going to use in order to deal with this crisis of having a less than safe campus. So we have a problem here, and the problem is that $300 million was taken from the universities. All kinds of things get used with that money, including building a children's hospital in one city and many other things. So faculty are just flabbergasted by this, because you get punished if you save money to do something important. And so these reserve funds they're not just used for frivolous purposes, they're used for essential needs that are not being covered in some other way. And every university needs to have a judgment to have some of its money retained and then used for a crisis that they face. So were punished for having done that by having J.D. Alexander propose that all of a sudden, let's just take all the money from the reserve funds. That's a way to balance the budget. So we not only lost 8% in the average rate of states compared with other states, we lost 8%, and that was a big cut. We lost $300 million on top of that, rated out of the funds. That's not even counted. So if you count that, we are at the bottom of the bottom. There are not even 5 states worse than Florida. You count that into what we had last year, and we are at the bottom of all those states.
Speaker Weatherford, I saw you glance my way. Did you want to say something about that?
Before he does, I'd be remiss if
Sure.
Can I just point out on behalf of UCF that if there's any national merit scholars that are your children, it is very safe in all the UCF laboratories. They want you to know that. Just saying. Notwithstanding the budget cuts, it's very safe in the university's laboratories.
Okay.
Let me address a couple of things. The first is, I'm not here to tell you that everything we do up in Tallahassee is right. I'm not here to tell you that everything we do up there is perfect. It's 160 people that come from every part of the state, 2 chambers and a governor, everybody having different priorities and what they think is important. It is dysfunctional by design, okay? And if you think we're bad, go about 2,000 miles north and look up there. We look great compared to them. But my point is that we have just gone through, starting in 2007, the worst recession that this state and this country has seen in over 3 generations. And so, yes, was the investment from the state less than what it was 6 years ago or 10 years ago? Yes, it was. But we were also the lowest tuition state in America at the same time. And so I think context is important here. Did we reduce the amount of investment? Yes, but we were investing more. Okay, that ratio of 3 to 1, for example, that we used to have, nobody else in America had that. We were leading it, and it was a great thing to have when we could afford it. But here we are sitting in 2013, and we still are in the bottom 5% when it comes to tuition. And you know what? Tuition should be cheap if you're going to a state and community college. It should be cheap if you're going to a non-research-based institution, but it should not be cheap if you're going to a research university in the state of Florida. There's a difference. Now, with regard to the $300 million, I frankly can't argue with that. I didn't like it either. I thought it was wrong. I thought it was at the last minute. I thought that we swept funds. We punished the people who did save the money. If any business was out there, we would want them to have reserves, and we took it. And I don't think that was right.
Thank you.
Okay? But we did it. And it's over now. The legislature is going to, it is.
You
But
promised
the
to give it
legislature
back.
is going to restore that money this year.
Right.
You'll see in our budget this year that $300 million will be restored. And hopefully we'll have more money than that. But just understand the context of, yeah, tough decisions have been made, okay? But we have just gone through a very challenging situation. And if you guys, or if the citizens of Florida are looking for a Florida House that likes the status quo with regard to the direction we're going in if we do nothing, I am not your guy. The Florida House will not be your chamber. If you think we can do better, if you think we can do better and we can reform and we can innovate and we can do more with what we have, and maybe, just maybe, even talk about investing more both with tuition and with money from the state, then we are your guy. But I'm not interested in having the Florida House pump more money into the existing structure. I think it's an old system that needs to be reformed. Things have to change with time, and government is usually the last thing that reforms because we don't have to. Because we get funded based on how many students show up, not based on what the product we're producing on the outside. And I think it's just time we address that. And so I know you guys can tell I'm probably a little passionate about this, but I believe long-term the future of Florida, not to be overly dramatic, but the future of Florida and what we will be in 20 and 30 years will be largely dictated based on the product of human capital we're producing out of our universities. I believe that.
Speaking of change, let's circle back to a minute to online learning, which has gotten a lot of attention. It got some attention after you proposed, maybe floated the idea of a separate university dedicated to online learning. And since then, the Parthenon Group has come up with a report that had several options. That was one of them. But can you talk about that for a moment? What should people in this audience expect to see come from the legislature in this session that would address and encourage more online learning?
Yes, I can, and I will, and I'll try to be brief. I know I went on a little bit of a rant there last time, so sorry about that.
That's it, rants are okay.
you know, with regard to online learning, you know, the Parthenon report I thought was an eye-opening opportunity. It basically just said that Florida is primed to take advantage of and leveraging of online technology. Now, I think my comments and the position of the House has maybe been misconstrued a little bit. We're not trying to go out and create a brand new, unbranded, unaccredited university. I think we just created one of those. I'm not really sure how it's working out. So, so we're not trying to go in that direction, but what we are saying is that there needs to be a focus, a clear focus and a collaborative purpose to create an entity of some sort, not really sure where it would be or who would control it, but that is solely focused on creating the best platform, the best content at the most affordable price. Governor Scott has been running around the state talking about these $10,000 degrees, which I think is a great thing, by the way, and he should be applauded for that. But technology allows us to offer a university-level quality degree at a very user-friendly platform for about $10,000 to $15,000 too. And that allows a whole host of people who have never had access to a quality university-based education to have access to it. And I thought that's what we always wanted, was to give more people access to a high-quality education. Technology does that. So I don't know what the end game is going to be, but it's not going to be creating some unbranded university or unaccredited university, because I think that'd be a waste of everybody's time and money. But it will be pushing the envelope a little bit to get more people exposed to online learning.
I was wondering if other members of the panel have an idea of what they think a successful online reform program would look like in Florida.
I think one of the concerns we have is that all of us are already doing a lot online. UCF's been recognized nationally for all that they're doing. Daytona State College was just recognized as #2 in the nation for their online bachelor's degree programs that they have. Seminole State, in terms of us, it's our second largest campus if you just took the students that are taking online education. So we already know we're heavily invested in online, and I think when we hear 13th University, knowing what we just went through with the Polytechnic, we're like, oh no, let's not go there again. But I think if you take everything that we're doing and try and catalog it or organize it so that students will have ready access, I think you'll find, Speaker, that many of us already have totally online degrees, and they're very good degrees for our students. But, I know, Mike, you and I were talking before the panel, and Mike was saying to me, well, isn't online education cheaper than offering it? Well, in terms of not having to build the buildings, yes, but in terms of faculty support, teaching faculty how to be online instructors, library support services, our accrediting association makes us have all the regular support services for students that you would have if they were physically present on the campus. We also know that most students do better and will complete courses more if they're in a hybrid course, that it's not straight online. Because a lot of students go into it thinking they have the discipline to be online students, and then realize kind of midway they don't. So if we can do a hybrid where there's some face-to-face time with a faculty member as well as the online portion. I think there's all kinds of great models out there if we all work together to come up with what is truly best for Florida and then fund it.
But is this the kind of thing that should be left to the college or the university to decide, or should there be some sort of mandate from the state? Tico, Perez?
I can tell you, Mike, I mean, first I want to make sure when we think about online universities or virtual universities, we actually broaden that scope. There are some extraordinary online education providers out there in the private sector for remediation, E2020, companies of that nature, to some of the major universities in the world post all of their courses or many of their coursework online for free. You can take it, you can audit it, and we may need to figure out if we're going to give them credit for it. But I will tell you that the Parthenon Group study that was performed for the Board of Governors Committee that looked at this issue, which again is online at flbog.edu if you want to look at the study, it's an extraordinary study, and it takes 3 models. It says, number one, we keep doing what we're doing, and they were very happy to point, they said UCF was the model in America for online course delivery, a phenomenal kudos from a third party. They say we can keep doing what we're doing, each university and college doing their own program. Number 2, we can set up centers and hubs where one university or 2 universities specifically own that component part of the education delivery system. Or number 3, you set up that separate university, which I don't think anybody has an appetite to do. But Mike, to your question, I mean, I think you've got to have some direction from the Board of Governors or the legislature to appoint or anoint, as the case may be, someone who is in charge of coordinating and managing that system statewide to avoid a lot of the duplication issues, to find the shared services, to find the synergies, to actually make this affordable. What we need to also remember, however, is this isn't the world where we have one student who is all online and one student who's at the classroom. Many of our students take online courses, they take courses on campus, they take courses at a branch campus. This is not this universe of, well, these are the online students and these are not. It is all of us. I think UCF, Tony, 35% of your courses? 34% of the courses at UCF, the second largest university in America, were online last year. I mean, this is a very robust market. It's a very invested market, and it's really a matter of, I think, the Board of Governors and the legislatures, as I said, anointing or appointing someone to be in charge of that system of coordination, because that 13th university appetite is waning for many.
Well, let's, Dr. Oxter, if you could briefly comment, we wanted to go back to the audience again and see what's on their mind.
I just want to follow up on the hybrid idea. It's very important to do research at each university and at each college about how it is that you can have some successful mix of hybrid, that is some classroom and some online in the same course. And my discussions with the computer science faculty in the College of Engineering at the University of Florida, and I've been spending a lot of time there asking the faculty in computer science what it is that makes things work. They are convinced that you need to have some instructor interaction with the students in order for students to feel like they have any progress that they're making at all. And when I heard the UCF presentation at the last Board of Governors meeting, which was at UF, this was in fact one of the conclusions that they were drawing, that what they call blended courses are much stronger in faculty satisfaction and in student satisfaction. And that means that students have the ability to actually face-to-face see the instructor, ask questions, react to things that the professor is saying, hear other students react to those things, and to have conversations with students and with their peers around what they're studying. That's a college experience. And to have a blended course is much more successful by all these criteria than to have something that is totally online and the person doesn't interact with anybody and has basically a passive approach to learning in higher education. So I really want to thank UCF for doing the research on this and for pioneering some of this research that is there. And I also want to add a cautionary note to allow the universities and colleges to see what works for their students. Not all students in population bases are the same, and you may find some differences. But if you try to create rules at the top and give a top-down solution, you're inviting trouble. You're inviting one person's solution to be imposed on everybody, regardless of whether it's going to be successful.
Diane, an audience question.
This shifts directions a little bit, but there's been at least 5 or 6 questions all pertaining in the same area. What needs to happen simultaneously in K through 12 in order to ensure the goals for higher ed are accomplished?
Good question. Dr. McGee, we talked about remediation as well. Perhaps you could take that one.
Well, the whole K-12 segment in Florida, I think you'll find that the Florida college system, colleges, are partnering with K-12 to help the students get through high school and get on with the right skills. I'll look at Seminole County because we've got such a great partnership with them. They realized that about 70% of their students they were sending us needed remediation in math. And so we partnered with them, took the math curriculum into the high schools, and now we're down into the 20% needing math remediation. Those kinds of programs are going on all across the state. But when you talk about remediation, the piece, and Mike, what you and I were talking about earlier, the bigger group of people needing remediation from us are adults returning. And so we've got to stop putting the blame on the K-12 system and saying they're not sending us students who are prepared. I think there are a lot of those kinds of efforts underway that are helping to much better prepare the K-12 students. I think we've got to look at returning adults and say, how do we help them? And remediation is broken. It's broken nationwide. It's not just in Florida. If a student comes into Seminole and they need 3 remedial courses, reading, English, and math, their chances of ever graduating is about 1% will. And that's a horrific number. But they get demoralized. You know, they don't want to stay and continue to take courses that don't count as college credit. So we've got to look at remediation, but not remediation necessarily in terms of K-12, but in terms of the returning adult, which is a huge part of our workforce. So I think K-12 is doing a great job. We have fabulous partnerships. It's all about what's best for the students, particularly in this area between the K-12 system, Seminole, Orange County, the community colleges, and then the universities. So I don't think you're going to find a better system in terms of getting students through.
Does anybody else want to comment on that? Okay. Well, let's go back to tuition for 1 second. Speaker Weatherford, if I heard you right, I think to summarize, it sounds like you are not crazy about the idea of differentiated tuitions between majors, but you are better with the idea of differentiating tuition between universities. Did I get that right? And if so, can you explain what your thinking is on that?
Yeah, I just, I think, and I may be wrong, but, we have created a system where everybody is the same. And, the type of education you get from one institution to another is different. The national recognition that you get from one institution to another is different, and why we have painted them all with the same brush from a tuition perspective just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. And, the University of Florida could be a top 10 university in the next 5 to 10 years, nationally recognized. It could happen. We could actually make that happen. But it's going to cost money. And so, the question is the state legislature going to write a bigger check? Should people pay more to go to the University of Florida? Should their tuition be higher than maybe some others? There's different ways to approach it, and I just think that, the idea of having, excuse me, the idea of having more expensive programs and trying to differentiate tuition by programs and socially engineer people to say, we're going to make this program cheap, so come over here, or we're going to make this inexpensive to disincentivize that. I think that's a dangerous path. I do think we have to recognize some of our world-class research institutions in Florida and take the chains off and allow them to run. And if you're a student that can't afford to go there because of the cost of tuition, we should and will find a way to create that safety net for you. But for a student who comes from a family that can afford to pay for it, why are we paying students whose parents make a lot of money? We're paying them to go to a state institution like UCF or Florida. They make money at the end of the day. I mean, the incentives are in all the wrong places, and we have created, I think, a broken model and system, and it's going to take a lot to change it. I'd just like to add one thing that has not been talked about with this online conversation, and that is that nobody says this, but the truth is, online learning currently is a revenue generator for all the universities and state colleges for the most part. I've talked to a lot of them, I've looked at it, and basically the state of Florida subsidizes every student to the tune of about $40,000 to $50,000 a year for a 4-year degree. That's about what it costs us to educate them at a university. What it costs to give someone an online degree costs about $25,000. It's about half as much. But we actually charge students, if you take the same class online at the University of Florida, for example, as you take showing up in a brick and mortar classroom, you pay more because you pay more fees. There's technology fees and all these other things associated with it. So we have disincentivized people to take online learning. We're charging them more for a product that costs the university half as much to produce. And I just think all of that has to be factored in too. And so when we talk about expanding online learning, what you're also talking about is saving money. We can save a lot of money. And we've made a decision to subsidize education, which I believe in, think is the right thing to do. But we're not subsidizing the fastest growing form of it, which is online learning.
Dr. Oxter, I heard you express reservations about charging a student a different amount of money to get an anthropology degree, say, or philosophy degree, an electrical engineering degree. Do you have a problem with charging students a lot more money to go to your University of Florida than to a smaller university?
Well, I don't have a problem with doing it, but the problem is, there is a problem with the safety net, and it seems like the safety net always has a lot of holes in it, and that students who are in a sort of middle range of income and can barely afford to make it on what the tuition is now can find themselves in real trouble. So if I strongly believed that the safety net was real, then I would be more enthusiastic about it. But I see the damage that can be done to students, and if you want the graduation rate to stay as low as it can be, then you need to pay attention to that factor. There are other issues too, but I'll leave it.
Okay. Well, let's go back to one thing. Dr. Meeke, did you have something you want to say about that?
Well, I wanted to kind of throw out an idea for the speaker, because back when I was a community college student in Florida and then a university student at Florida State, and I'd like to see Florida State be one of the ones considered, by the way, to be that #1 university. But I had a scholarship that I got for 4 years to go to a Florida institution. But then at the end of those 4 years, I owed the state of Florida 4 years as a teacher, that I had to work in the system. Now we're doing Bright Futures, and I know I've heard numbers like 90% plus at the University of Florida and Florida State are on Bright Futures. So to me, if you're looking at the dollar amounts, you're already dealing with students who their education is somewhat subsidized. If we're looking at fields that we really need for students to go into and we want to incentivize them, what better way than to tie some type of, you need to work in the state of Florida, you need to contribute back to the state that has helped to give you your education. And to me, that's the piece that's been missing all along as we've looked at Bright Futures and looked at just handing these students an education, and then after they graduate, they can go anywhere, and many of them go out of state. So that would be the idea that I'd want to throw out for the speaker.
And Mike, if I may, I just want to draw your attention, when you get a moment afterwards or go online, there's a net tuition and fees.
What's that web address again?
flboge.edu. But there is a net tuition and fees by family income chart there, and what it does is it looks at a family's income, it takes a look and analyzes all of the financial aid, the Bright Futures, all of the money that is available to those students, and it gives you a net cost for a student, tuition and fees, not living expenses and books, to attend each of the state university system schools, and I think those numbers will amaze you. So take a look at that, and you'll see that unless your family is making over $60,000 at the University of Florida, you're still making money by going to that university based upon the Bright Futures financial aid and fees. And the other thing I want to point out, because Dr. Oxter talked about the less served and the donut hole issue, I suppose, on these tuition increases, and I'm confident when Speaker Weatherford talked about increasing tuition, and if you can pay for it, pay for it. If you can't, we'll take care of you. One of the great things the legislature did when we created differential tuition years ago was to require that 33% of all the differential tuition that is collected by each university gets plowed directly back into need-based financial aid for those needy students. And we've seen large increases in need-based financial aid as a result of that, and I'm sure Speaker Weatherford is contemplating that as he talks about it with the University of Florida and other universities, freeing them to go to the market.
We only have a few minutes left, so I wanted to go back to something, Tico Perez, that you mentioned a few minutes ago, and ask Speaker Weatherford to talk about it, because you've mentioned the idea that legislators shouldn't be packing projects into the budget for universities or colleges and the
I didn't
like.
say that. Will said that,
You didn't
right?
say that.
Okay,
That's-
just to be clear.
I
I never
right.
said that.
But what you did say is that the way the money is handed out, or who hands out the money, ought to be rethought. That maybe instead of the legislature doing it, maybe the Board of Governors should be put in charge of that. So Speaker Weatherford, you mentioned some things that are broken in Florida. Is that system broken?
Well, I think, Tico's point, and there's a legitimate point to be made here, that, they don't have enough teeth to do their job as a Board of Governors. And that, everybody has to understand that they were just suing us up until about 18 months ago for like 5 years. So we're just kind of.
It didn't mean we didn't love you, though.
That's right. We're just now getting back,
We just disagreed.
we're just now having drinks again. And I say that in jest, but the truth was, when I got elected in 2006, we were at war with the Board of Governors. I mean, we were all, lawyered up and fighting, and we weren't on the same team. That has changed fundamentally. And we have empowered the Board of Governors tremendously over the last 2 to 3 years through policy to give them a lot of the things and the regulatory responsibilities that the legislature is doing that, frankly, we shouldn't be doing. We should not be micromanaging the universities. Now, when it comes to the money, that's a different conversation, because now you're talking about the appropriating function. And in our Constitution, we believe very strongly that the appropriations are given to the legislature. Now, long-term, does it make sense at some point to give a lump sum to the Board of Governors to allow them to do that? It may. I'm willing to admit that that's a conversation that we should be willing to have. But I think we have to see how the authority we've already given them over the last 3 years works out and how they utilize it. There's a lot of great things happening at the Board of Governors. It hasn't all been implemented yet, but there are some reforms taking place that we're excited about. And I think if they can show that they can get the results that they're talking about, the legislature would be more willing to give them more authority and potentially maybe even some revenue. But I've got some people in this room that may disagree with me tremendously on this issue, but I do believe it's something we should consider, but we're just not there yet.
Mike, I just want to echo that the progress in the relationship has been extraordinary. We were indeed at loggerheads with the legislature for many years, and settling the lawsuit and the confidence that the legislature has shown the Board of Governors, and hopefully the Board of Governors has earned from the legislature, continues to grow, and it is an ongoing dance. But at the end of the day, the Board of Governors was created by a constitutional amendment. And the challenge that the Board of Governors faces, and it's a frustration of the board, and I know it's a frustration of the legislature, is, as the Speaker appropriately said, the board doesn't have the teeth to do its job. We put forth a legislative budget proposal. It comes from the universities. The legislature funds the universities directly, so the Board of Governors can't exact issues, they can't exact policies, they can't exact discipline. If I were king for a day, I would do two things to give the Board of Governors teeth. Number one, I would lump sum that budget amount approved by the legislature and given by the legislature to the Board of Governors. And number two, I would let the Board of Governors fire university presidents. Those are the two things which would give the Board of Governors teeth. I agree with that. Both of those things would really let the Board of Governors exert its influence as a constitutional body in the state of Florida.
I want to thank the panel. It was a great discussion. Thank you all for coming down. And thank you all for coming. We'll see you again.
This episode of Metro Center Presents is brought to you in part by the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies and the Orlando Sentinel.